When the city inspector red-tagged her bakery and padlocked the doors, most people expected Elara Vance to fold. Instead, the quiet baker turned the tables with one move they never saw coming. Elara had seen kitchens shut down for health code violations before, but never one like this. This closure wasn't about grime or rodents. It was about envy, bureaucracy, and a lock she didn't own. One Tuesday morning, just as the first rays of sun gilded the cobblestones of the old merchant district, Elara arrived with a key and a smile, ready to fire up the ovens for the day's sourdough. She froze. A bright orange sticker was slapped across her vintage glass door. "Condemned. Structurally unsafe," it declared. And through the glass, she saw a heavy-duty steel hasp and padlock bolted to her doorframe. Her hands, dusted with a permanent sprinkle of flour, trembled as she reached for the notice. The order was signed by the city's head building inspector, Corbin Hale. The reason cited, substandard foundation and load-bearing walls. A violation she'd never been notified about, never cited for, in the 5 years she'd owned the rising crust. Elara had left a high-stress corporate branding job to build this place. At 42, with a savings account she'd drained and a heart full of hope, she'd purchased the dilapidated old building and painstakingly restored it herself, beam by beam. She knew every inch of its foundation. It was solid. By 10 a.m., a man in a city van was taking photos of her exterior brickwork. "Morning," Elara called out, her voice tighter than she intended. "Mind explaining this?" The man didn't look up from his camera. "Talk to the inspector's office." And then she saw him. Corbin Hale, pulling up in a pristine city-issued sedan. He stepped out, wearing a crisp collared shirt and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Vance," he said, without preamble. "You've been notified of the imminent safety concerns." Elara frowned. Imminent? This building was inspected and cleared 6 months ago for the new awning permit. "New seismic data on the old merchant row," he replied briskly. "Your foundation doesn't meet updated code. Until it's corrected by a city-approved contractor, this measure is for public safety." He gestured to the lock. "Public safety." Elara gestured to the window, where her proofing baskets sat idle on the counter. "That's my livelihood there. My starter culture. It needs daily care. It's over 100 years old. You're killing it." Corbin's smile was thin. "The preservation of perishables isn't a city concern, Ms. Vance. The structural integrity of a historic district is." He turned back to his car. "Contact my office when you're ready to discuss the approved contractor list. Have a pleasant day." The city worker finished his task and left without another word. Elara stood there, the morning sun warming a street that felt suddenly cold. That night, she sat at the small table in her apartment above the shop with her neighbor, Leo, a retired history professor who'd lived on the street for 40 years. "Hale's been doing this for a while," Leo said, sipping his tea. "He has a cousin who runs a big contracting firm. They get the approved list. If you don't use them, you don't get your permits. Or, apparently, you get padlocked." Elara shook her head. "I didn't pour everything I have into this place to be shaken down by a corrupt inspector." "Then you better be ready for a fight," Leo replied. "He won't back down. And he sure as hell won't give you that key unless you play his game." Elara leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't sure yet how far this would go, but the sourdough starter, a living heirloom passed down through 3 bakers, was depending on her. This wasn't just a business, it was a legacy. The next morning, she went to the library, accessed the city's public property portal, and started pulling every record, every permit, every inspection report for her building and every other one on the street. If Corbin Hale wanted a fight, he'd get one. But she had no idea just how deep the rot went. At her appeal hearing in a sterile city conference room, Corbin Hale sat at the head of the table, flanked by junior officials. "Ms. Vance," he began, "let's talk about those non-compliant foundation footings." Elara took a slow breath. They were poured in 1910, same as every building on this row. They've held for over a century. Your own department's records show no subsidence, no cracking. Codes evolve, he replied smoothly. Ignorance isn't an excuse. The closure stands until the work is done. Elara set her folder on the table. And if I use my own contractor, one I trust, then we cannot guarantee the work will pass inspection, he said, his voice laced with false sympathy. The fines for non-compliance will continue to accrue daily. She met his eyes. You already make exceptions. The antique shop 2 doors down had full foundation work done last year by a contractor not on your list. They're open. A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Corbin's lips tightened. That was a different situation. Your case is clear. The lock stays. She walked out, her frustration boiling. Leo was waiting outside. He's not just strict, he said in a low voice. He's got friends on the city council and a brother-in-law in the mayor's office. People don't cross him. Elara looked back through the glass doors. Corbin was shaking hands with a man in a suit with a contractor's logo on the breast pocket. Both of them were smiling. I'm not playing his game, Elara said finally. But she didn't yet realize the lengths Corbin would go to protect his scheme. The breaking point came 36 hours later. Elara, using a locksmith friend who owed her a favor, had managed to get inside just long enough to feed her starter and assess the situation. The starter was weakening in the cold, dark kitchen. She saw a new notice slid under the door, a fine for unauthorized entry. She drove straight to Corbin's office. This isn't about code anymore, she said, her voice steady though her hands were clenched. You are knowingly destroying private property. That starter is irreplaceable. Corbin's reply was smooth. Ms. Vance, the city operates under uniform code. If we make exceptions, it undermines public safety. The rules are the rules. As she walked away, she saw secretaries peeking out from cubicles, watching. The fight was now a spectacle. The real twist came from Leo. I've been digging, he said, arriving at her door with a dusty file. That padlock. It's not on the city's inventory list. I checked. It's a private purchase. Elara stared at him. So he doesn't have the authority to put it there? It's a gray area. But it gave me an idea. Leo pointed to the city charter. There's a provision. Any fixture attached to city property, like a sidewalk or a light pole, belongs to the city. But a fixture attached to private property without express written consent from the owner, that could be considered trespass and vandalism. Elara's eyes widened. The lock is attached to my doorframe. On my property. Exactly, Leo said, grinning. So whatever he does next, he's already on thin ice. But Elara knew if Corbin caught wind, he'd find a way to cover his tracks. So whatever she did next would have to be public and undeniable. She didn't call the police. She called a local news reporter who had done stories on city corruption before. She also called her lawyer. The next morning, with the news camera rolling and her lawyer by her side, Elara stood in front of her bakery. Corbin Hale arrived, his face a mask of fury at the sight of the camera. Ms. Vance, this is a closed work site, he barked. Mr. Hale, Elara said, her voice clear for the microphone. This lock is attached to my private property without my permission. According to City Charter Section 12.4.3, that constitutes unlawful trespass. You have 2 choices. You can remove it immediately, or I will have my locksmith remove it, and then I will press charges against you and the city for criminal vandalism. Corbin spluttered, his carefully constructed authority crumbling under the gaze of the camera. This is highly irregular. The safety order can be served without illegally affixing a private lock to my building, her lawyer finished smoothly. We will comply with any lawful order. This is not one. The camera zoomed in on Corbin's pale, sweating face. He was trapped. To enforce his order, he'd have to admit on television that he'd broken the law to do it. With a silent, seething glare, he fumbled in his pocket, produced a key, and unbolted the lock himself. The sound of the shackle popping open was the sweetest sound Elara had ever heard. The camera kept rolling as she pushed open her door, the bell jingling cheerfully. The smell of yeast and flour wafted out into the street. The story led the evening news. By the next day, the mayor's office had announced a full review of the building inspector's approved contractor program. Corbin Hale was placed on administrative leave. Elara didn't celebrate that night. Instead, she sat in her quiet bakery, feeding her revived starter. She knew the fight wasn't entirely over. There would be hearings, paperwork, and likely a new, more careful inspector to deal with. But the lock was gone. The fear was gone. And as she looked out the window, she saw other shop owners on the street giving her a thumbs up, their spines a little straighter than before. If there was one lesson in all of it, it was simple. You can padlock a door, but you can't padlock determination. And sometimes, the key to winning isn't fighting their dirty game, but changing the rules entirely. So, if you're listening to this and you've got your own padlocked door, whatever it might be, don't assume you have to accept it. Read the fine print. Find the leverage. And never, ever let someone else lock away your passion. Subscribe for more real stories that remind you that your work matters, your legacy matters, and no one can shutter your dreams unless you let them do so.